Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to Divergent Conversations.
We're taking a pause from recording new episodes for a while, and we're going to re-release some old ones. We've both talked about feeling like this podcast has been like flying by the seat of our pants, and we want to be a little bit more intentional with it.
We're going to re-release 10 episodes. See y'all in like 10 weeks. Just know that these episodes coming out are all thematic, and we selected ones that we think are really, really good. Hope that you catch things that maybe you missed the first time around, or maybe you didn't listen to the first time around.
Maybe it'll give people a breather to like catch up.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Divergent Conversations. Today, Megan and I are going to talk about romanticizing, and I don't know, we still don't know if this is a word, romantification that comes up as ADHDers when we are romanticizing about experiences and new things that are stimulating and exciting, and how that can really be impactful on your day-to-day and your livelihood.
I think we need to make it a word if it's not a word. So we'll just keep using romantification until it becomes a thing.
Perfect.
Yeah. I was thinking about this because I feel like we kind of touched on this when we did the attachment episode on, I think we talked about neurodivergent attachment. And as we do, we focus more on the autistic experience. And so we did talk about it a little bit about how tempting it is to live in fantasy. But I think this is kind of different. I know for me, it feels different. It's more about I project to my future self that like they're going to be a certain way. And then I'm always disappointed when it turns out that my future self is still struggling with executive functioning and still struggling with making healthy decisions. And that does feel a little bit different than the way we've talked about autistic fantasy and escape and kind of living in fantasy. What about for you? Does it feel similar? Does it feel different?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to portray that and define that, because I think you're right. It's like this romanticized idea, or this romantification of, can't wait for people in our DMs to be like, that's not a word, to project this desired outcome based on, if all of these things happen, or if I do these things, then future me is going to really flourish. It's going to really thrive. It's really going to have an easier go at life. It never seems to add up, however.
Mm-hmm. So who is the romantified Patrick? Like when you look forward to your future and it's like there's an idealized Patrick out there, who is he?
I think that he has... Okay, this is the romantified version, especially when it comes to ADHD, because we talked about restlessness over the last couple of episodes. The romantified version of Patrick in future self is settled, is like content, but content with present circumstances, is not constantly thinking about the next thing or anxious about the next thing. Both of those things exist pretty simultaneous for me. I think that there's also the ability to just appreciate existence, which is not something I often am able to do because I'm so focused on the future, everything that can go wrong, all the different ideas, all the flurry of like things that are happening to me and day-to-day projects, ideas, creativities. I think settled, content, present, those would be romanticized ideas that I have never been able to obtain.
That, like, I felt that in my chest when you were talking. That word contentment, that was something in my community. That thread was picked up a lot by folks in the episode that just aired of, and the sadness of that. And I when I was reading other people's thoughts reflected back to me, I was like, oh yeah, I do feel a lot of sadness around that, around the difficulty to be content, to be present.
Yeah.
I think my future self is also very similar, in that, yeah, they're able to be content and be present with what is. The itch isn't there.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The itch isn't there because I do feel that way. It feels there's almost like this crawl out of my skin sensation that I feel on a moment by moment basis. And it's hard to often like pinpoint what's causing it in the moment because it could be so many different things. But I noticed it yesterday. Like my dad was in town visiting for a couple of days. He came to watch the dogs for us so we could go to my mother-in-law's 60th birthday party. And he's been here for 4 days. Yesterday, I noticed like this crawl out of my skin. I need to be doing something. I'm so restless. I'm so bored sitting on my couch. So then I almost start to think about like, okay, what can I do to get him not to no longer be bored? What if he's having a bad time? I'm really understimulated right now. I feel really anxious. I need to get out of here. And it's like 1 o'clock in the middle of the day. There's nothing going on. But that's been basically my existence my entire life, is that feeling of like, I am so uncomfortable in this present moment that I need to change my situation and my circumstances immediately.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah. I I relate to that a lot. I think I've shared this anecdote on this podcast, but I think it was in one of our first 10, so maybe I can reshare and recontextualize. But this was about 10, oh no, it was like 13, 14 years ago. It was when Luke and I were first married, and we were sitting at a Starbucks, and he was like, "Here, play this game." And it was like this game on a computer, very, very low tech. And it's just like a little line person, and there's a line, and then there's a maze beneath and a maze above. And I was like, "What are the instructions?" And he's like, "No instructions, just play." So I just start running with my little finger, like just on the line. And I'm trying to get to the end. And then at 5 minutes, the game ends. And I was like, "That was pointless. What was that?" And Luke was like, "Well, it's a game that basically it's kind of a microcosm of however you play it is how you navigate life." And I was like, "Oh." I was like, "Well, what did you do?" He's like, "I went and explored. Like I explored the mazes down below." And I just kind of, it was a really powerful moment for me of, that is how I live my life, of like, what's next? What's next? What's next? Let me get to the end. And I'm like,
Yep.
that is a like what? Till I die? Like, let me just get to the end till I die. Um, and that is how I live. And I work really hard to live differently, but it always feels like I'm fighting against my natural grain to try to slow down, be present, um, to not just be rushing from what's next, what's next, what's next.
That really, I don't think you shared that before, but that really hits home because I feel the same way where I'm just like feeling like I'm rushing to the next thing or through things and not able to absorb what's happening around me. And we've talked about this before. There's a lot of fixation on like end of life stuff, not the desire to not be here, but there is a lot of processing around like life inevitably comes to an end eventually. And it feels like I'm running out of time constantly. But it
Mhm.
also feels like I'm moving so fast through everything that I often think about the fact that I'm 37, about to be 38. And I just know that in 10 years, it's going to be like, that felt like the blink of an eye. And did I really even stop to pay attention to what was important around me? Or was I constantly in that headspace of like, what's next? What do I have to cross off the list? What do I have to do? What do I have to create? What's the next exciting thing? And it really does take away from day to day present existence.
Mhm. Yeah, it's this weird, like, I'm curious if this will relate based on what you just said. For me, it feels like this double-sided experience. I'm on one hand, I'm like you, I'm very existential. I'm thinking a lot about death. But the other side, I feel like I'm not thinking about that enough, in the sense that, like, I adore both my parents, and we used to live closer to them. But they live, 40 minutes from me. And sometimes I'll think about the fact they will die, right? And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I'm gonna feel so sad that I, like, didn't take that day and drive out and go on a walk or go spend time with them." And I know that in my head, but then pulling away, and primarily pulling away from work, taking a day to do that is so hard for me. I don't do it. And so there's this sense of I think about end of life and death all the time. I'm also aware if I keep living the way I am, I'm gonna have a lot of regrets when I get to end of life. And so there's
Yep.
um a what's the word? Cognitive disconnect. There's a fancy word for it. It's not in my head right now, but there's a dissonance. There's a dissonance there um, that I'm very aware of, but it's not the awareness of death is not solving the issue. I'm still just sprinting on that line.
That makes it so complicated, doesn't it, though? When you're so hyper aware of something, but it still feels like there's this inability to like come up for air or to
Mhm.
step away or zoom out. Um, Sometimes for me, if it does feel that way very often, and that's not just with death, like that's with a lot of things. I'm like, oh, I tore my calf muscle playing soccer. I want to get back to it. Here are all the exercises I should be doing for physical therapy. Am I doing any of those? No. And like, because I get so caught up in whatever else is happening around me so often that I lose sight over like the granular details and all of the
Mhm.
stuff that actually matters. Um, and then I think I've reached this point, call it burnout, call it whatever you need to call it, but where I just default into like almost like shutting down and being still and just doing nothing.
Mhm.
And that feels like my existence a lot of the time is like go, 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 shut down into nothingness and like try as hard as you can to recharge as slowly as possible. But then I miss out on everything that is probably much more important.
Mhm. I relate to that a lot. I did a stint with PT back when I had chronic pain for about 10 years. And thankfully, I f- I thought I was going to live with it forever. Thankfully, I found what was wrong, and it's no longer active. But when I was going to PT, it was so hard to do the exercises, and I was like, I know that I'll be in less pain if I do these exercises. Um, and it's the same thing right now with long COVID. I'm like, and with POTS, it's like I know if I get out and walk, like walking is one of the things that helps with the POTS cycle. But getting myself to actually do the things that I know will make me feel better in the long term. And I think that's part of the interest-based nervous system, which we talked about, and that's part of the, like, time that exists is now and not now for the ADHD brain, and so it's like, okay, if I get up and walk every day, or even, like, 4 times a week, in 2 months or in 1 month, I'll feel better. Like, that time doesn't it exists conceptually, but it doesn't exist. It doesn't create the same, um, urgency or importance to get us to do the things that would actually make us feel better. And this as, like, someone who worked in health psychology, this is so infuriating to be and right, I have all the interventions, I have all the advice I've given to people of, like, break it down, do small goals, pair it with something pleasurable. Like, I know these things.
Yeah. I'm just smiling because I'm like so relate to that. And it is that exact thing, right? Where in the moment, does that yield the best return on my investment for whatever short term dopamine burst that I need to get through my day or to create the thing or to accomplish something? I know if I put in the work for PT for the next 3 months, I can get back to playing soccer, which inevitably yields the biggest result mental health wise, physical health wise, socially, all the things. The day to day feels like impossibility. And even if the exercises are like 20 to 30 minutes, I'm like, but that doesn't feel that important right now. That doesn't feel that urgent. And it is that reality, though, that like the buildup and the sustained buildup would definitely have the more positive impact in the long run.
20 to 30 minutes actually is a long time. When people are struggling with PT exercises, I think it's often recommended, like, start, like, because 5 minutes is better than 0 minutes. So it's like the 20 to 30, that actually, that that's a big chunk of time for
Before
us.
we got on here, I did like one set of the 5 different exercises, and it was the first time in 3 weeks that I've done that. And I was just like, okay, maybe
Mhm.
I'll revisit those in a week. I don't know what's gonna happen next. So um It does feel like this constant internal cost benefit analysis, though, like moment by moment of what feels like the best usage of my energy and focus and my time and what feels the most interesting and engaging is typically going to win out over the things that are probably more important in the long run.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So, like, part of what I hear in both of our future selves that we idealize is the ability to prioritize based on our values. And that's interesting. I hadn't had that thought till those words just came out. This as part of my ADHD experience that causes a lot of pain is the inability to prioritize my life in a way that is consistent with my values. That's really hard for me. And that, yeah, that is the thing that causes a lot of pain.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right because I know you've mentioned on here before, like, would I love to be more intentionally focused on family stuff, health stuff? Sure. Where do I end up spending my time? In work, in creation, in these things that I spend a lot of my time doing as well. And it doesn't always feel like they add up or there's a congruency there in terms of values versus action.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Hmm.
because lots of values are kind of long game. It is that slower burn of like, it's
Yeah.
getting up, it's doing the 20, 30 minutes of PT, it's going on the walk, it's doing the important thing because it's important to us, but not necessarily exciting. And it's doing that consistently. These are things that are hard for our brains.
Consistency with any task is so hard for me. That's been like go to the gym, work out, do something that's fit. Like you said, 5 minutes is better than no minutes. Getting into any sort of routine where I'm doing anything in any consistent manner, given all the extenuating circumstances, like how did I sleep last night? What's my pain level today? What's my sensory system feel like? What am I, like where am I at in terms of my social capacities? There's so many factors that play into like the consistency rhythm of life, and they often fall by the wayside because I'm often just feeling so exhausted or so run down or so overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. Same. I think the added layer of fatigue for me, like, yeah, the combination of executive functioning challenges and then fatigue, that's where like that consistency, it just,
Yeah.
yeah.
What an
Mm.
uplifting conversation today.
I know. I was just thinking about this. It's been interesting, Patrick. I've noticed a pull, like some of the things we've been talking about. I'm like, ooh, like I just did a deep dive on habits and I actually have some thoughts about things that are helpful, but I don't want to like, there's a temptation, right? There's a temptation when we hit the heavy, when we hit the hard, when we hit the pain to, to move into, fix it mode.
Yeah.
And so I've been kind of having an eye on the conversation of like, I don't want it to feel like a hopeless conversation, but I also don't want to scurry away to minimize and to go into fix it mode. Because as ADHDers, a lot of people around us and ourselves like jump into fix it mode. Um, but
Absolutely.
yeah, this is a heavy conversation.
I'm glad you named that because that's definitely what it feels like. And I think that, but I think when we talk about the stuff that feels really heavy and painful, it's oftentimes the most relatable stuff to people who are out there searching for ways to put words to the experiences that they're having. Um, and you're right about the fix it mode thing. I mean, hell, just thinking about what I said about my dad and him being here yesterday, that's where my brain was like, fix it mode. Okay, this is boring. We're sitting in the house. How do I fix his experience of today versus like, what does my body need and what does my nervous system need today? And it was probably like just to lay on the couch and rest and watch uh, Naked and Afraid reruns, which is what I was doing at the time when all of these ideas started coming into my mind.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That is it. It might sound subtle, but probably I think significant shifting from fix it to, okay, what do I need in this moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely trying to do that more often of like experience the discomfort, right? Because I think so many of us are experiencing discomfort so often. Try really hard to identify like what do I need? Because it's not always helpful trying to identify where is this coming from,
Mhm.
because that turns into this whole litany and laundry list of things. So like the what do I need right now in order to soothe my system a little bit is a really helpful question that I am trying to revisit more and more and more throughout my day.
That's so interesting. For me, I like need to know where it's coming from. That's what contains it. Is like if I can pinpoint, okay, I'm feeling this like routine disruption, right? We're transitioning to summer right now. Kids the last week of school for kids. So there's free floating angst around routine disruption. Once I can name that, it provides a little bit of a containment around the experience. So the first place I go when I'm experiencing anything uncomfortable is my head to be like, okay, what's the cause? I think people are going to be different. Like, so I love that you're like, for you, that can send you spiraling. For me, if I can't identify the cause, it's going to like just, it's going to grow bigger and bigger until I can put words around it that identify the cause.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can definitely relate to that because I get into that mindset very often where like I go into the cognitive place and I have to figure out the solution and the precursor to something. I just have become increasingly more aware that there's like multiple somethings most of the time. So it's never for me in a lot of situations just one thing that's causing discomfort. So that for me personally, that can feel really self-defeating if I'm like searching for the answer and then it's like, well, it could be this, it's probably this, this is also happening. So
I can see how that could, yeah, for sure. For sure.
yeah,
It's like, yeah.
I
It's,
get into like information overload, analysis paralysis, then situations because then I'm like, how do I fix all of this stuff at once?
oh, so maybe that's part of what's different. When I'm doing it, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to just name it. I think if
That's
I was like, okay, so it's routine disruption, I'm having a big fatigue week, I have this deadline. If I was like naming all those and as like problems to be fixed, that would increase my stress. But it's really like a tagging of like, okay, I see you. You're contributing to my sympathetic arousal right now. So are you. So are you. So are you. Okay.
that makes
So
a
it's
lot
like
of sense.
naming all the guests at the party. Um,
Right.
yeah.
No, I like that. That's a good perspective. I'll give the opposite perspective of what just happened to me. I was texting you about restless leg syndrome, which is a fun thing that I'm just experiencing. But then this is what happens. Identify restless leg syndrome. Okay, check that off the list. I understand why I'm in so much pain, why I can't sleep. The next problem is that I then deep dive all of the ways I can support myself. So it's like, okay, take this supplement, take this thing, do this exercise. Then I start looking at the supplements. Okay, take magnesium and vitamin B6. I then research all the reviews on said supplements. Then I start figuring out what makes the most sense to order right now. How do I do this in it just becomes chaos.
Okay, I do relate to that. I do that. That's actually been my experience with some of the long COVID pot stuff. Of like, I start researching it, I get overwhelmed, and then I have like 10 things of supplements in my cupboards.
Right.
My cupboard's filled with good intentions that then expire.
Yep. Which is kind of what we talked about last
Like I
week
should
about
be taking
ADHD,
these.
you know? It's like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I do relate to that, and that creates a lot of paralysis, especially when there's. And I think that's where some of this health stuff gets so tricky is a lot of us do end up going to the internet, especially if we have more obscure
yeah.
health conditions. Um, and then it is information overload and paralysis and like which one's the
Yeah.
best. And yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll end up trying it for a day or two and then decide it didn't work. And then that just goes like,
Because you would know after 2 days.
yeah, of course. They're like, try this for 30 days. I'm like, no, I need instantaneous relief. Like this is not helpful.
Yeah. No, hard to relate. Hard to relate. I get that. Yeah.
My PCP at this point in time just probably looks at messages in the portal and is just like, okay, yeah, let's try this thing. Like, okay,
Mhm.
you're now experiencing this. Let's do these tests. It's fine. But I prefer that approach over like, there's no issue here. Like, this is
Mhm.
probably nothing. So I do feel like that's more important for me right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, that is a different energy. The like the fix it and then this decision paralysis around how to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we live in information overload. Like it's so weird. The internet's so great, and it's like so overwhelming.
So terrible in so many ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, going back into romantification, right? And this is probably more autistic romanticism, but the romanticized idea of disappearing to a cabin in the woods in the mountains for a month and just getting away from everything is a frequent visitor in all of my thoughts. Like right before we were on here, I was looking up pet friendly mountain rentals. So,
That's cool. Yeah, yeah. I have a similar, like, I think this feels kind of ADHD. It's like a merge of my ADHD and autism. Like, I think my fantasy, okay, here's part of my, well, okay, part of my fantasy, my future self is not messy. I'm very messy and I don't love that. And for all the like ADHD hacks in the world, I can't fix it. Every time my bathroom keeps getting cluttery, my desktop keeps getting cluttery, no matter what like system I try. Um, so that's just an aside. My future self is not messy, but that was Divergent. Okay, back to okay. My like 10-year future self dream has maybe sold neurodivergent insights, although that feels weird because I'm so connected to it. So I don't really know how that would work. But I am like retired and traveling with my spouse and I. And so I'm not bored and I have no obligations. Like I have no like work obligations. And whenever I share that fantasy with my spouse, he's like, well, that is a nice fantasy, but that's not how you work. You're always going to be working. But part of my fantasy is like no responsibilities.
yeah.
And that I said it a few episodes ago, like my child's fantasy of I can rest when I'm retired. I think it is that of like once I get all the obligations done with, I can finally be present to my life.
Oh, that feels
And
fun.
yes.
Yeah. I would
Yeah.
co-sign that fantasy. I have the same one where it's just getting to the end. I think that's the fantasy for me. Getting to the end of obligation, getting to the end of being responsive, having to take extra steps to do certain things in my life to get certain things done with or completed. Or I think it's just that fantasy of disconnecting from it all and having it no longer exist. But then my wife would say the same thing. Like, that's not how you work. You're never going to get to a place where you can just do quote unquote nothing. Which
our spouses are good like reality checks for us.
I'm like, I can't wait until this happens. She's like, yeah, but then you're just going to find something else to consume all your energy and time with. Yeah, that does feel true.
So I was literally, I was talking with Luke this weekend because I was like, it was a relaxing weekend and I wanted to relax, but all I could do was work. So I did relaxing work. I did like redesigns and I was working on my like Notion system. But I was like, I need a hobby. And he was like, yeah, you do. And so I was having a conversation with with ChatGPT. I was like, okay, here are some of my limits. Here's who I am. Give me some hobbies. And I was just like, no, no, no. Like, oh, I suck at having hobbies.
GPT suggested for you as a hobby?
I should pull it up. I think, well, like some of them were decent. Gardening and puzzles, which I do like puzzles, especially if I pair it with a stimulating like podcast or audiobook. Well, the two I remember were the ones that I was like, okay, I could kind of see that. But yeah, a lot of the hobbies are just like, or like crafting. If I don't see like, if it doesn't feel productive, then the restlessness, like this is a waste of my time. And this is where my, like, I don't know if this is internalized capitalism. I think it might be, but like, if I can't see how it could make me money, it doesn't feel productive. But I do want to unpack that because it's not just about money. In my mind, it's if this can make me money, then someday I cannot have obligations because someday I can like save up enough that I can be done with everything. So
Right.
it is about the money, but it's also about like this fantasy of a future self who has no work obligations and is finally able to be present to my life.
Yeah, I get that completely. I mean, I think that's been a fantasy of mine since I was like 14 years old is to retire.
Mhm.
Like, who the hell thinks about that when they're 14 years old? I just remember thinking like, I can't wait to not do this anymore. Um, so I totally, totally relate to that because it is that fantasy, that romantification of once the obligations are done, once the tasks no longer need to be completed, once I don't have to be the one responsible for whatever, wow, life is going to feel so easy. And I know that's a lie because I know I'm never going to get to that place. I mean, my best hope is that I can find the balance because I don't foresee a life where that just becomes 24/7 reality for me.
Mhm. What would the balance look like?
I think significantly more time away from things like so stepping away from technology, stepping away from work obligations, like really figuring out a way where I don't feel like I have to be creating or grinding or present for things to work in my career or at least financially so that like I feel like there's a lot of pressure all the time for me to be creating or present or available. And I think the balance would be a complete shift on a 180 shift in that regard.
Mhm. Mhm. So I'm gonna throw this out there because I think you don't have this problem. I think we have inverse problems here. For me, I actually I'm out of since closing my practice. I do feel like I could step away a bit more, or like I've got autoresponders up on email. I have someone who does customer support for me, so I do feel like I can step away from work at this point. Um, but then I have nothing to do. Or like everything that I would do requires physical bodily energy, which I have very little of. Like I have energy to sit and be on my computer.
Sure.
Um, but my bodily energy is so low that it's like I just don't know what to do. So it's more about not not knowing how to fill my time. For you, it sounds like there's still a sense of like urgency of like there's just too many demands on you. But you
Yeah.
do I think you do a better job of filling your time when you do step away.
Yeah. But I, like you, would probably need to do something like you did with ChatGPT, which feels like the most neurodivergent thing of all time. Of here are these parameters, give me some hobbies. Um, because without soccer in my life, I don't have a hobby. And I've realized that the more often I've gotten injured over time as I've gotten older, of like, what do I do with my free time? I live in this beautiful place surrounded by endless nature. I'm never in it. I'm like, do I enjoy anything? What do I do that would, yeah, I don't know. That's a,
Do I enjoy anything? So that that's it. Like for me, there's very little I enjoy, and that's sad. Um,
yep, yep.
mhm,
I look at my wife who has like, she's a member of like multiple book clubs at one time, and she is in different plays that she's either in rehearsal for or for actual showings for, or she's creating something in her craft room, or like, and she's just got so many hobbies. And then I'm like, I don't even know if I have one. Like, it's such a struggle to find the do I really enjoy anything? And I don't even know if I enjoy soccer. I just think I've known it since I was young and it's an outlet in a lot of ways. So, yeah. Mm.
so that's interesting because you've talked about your wife being an ADHDer. So maybe we have yet again hijacked our ADHD conversation and made it about autism because maybe it is more about like the energy limits and the sensory limits. I know for me, there's a lot of things I think I'll enjoy, and then the reason I don't is because I don't enjoy the sensory aspect of the experience or just the amount of energy it takes for me. It's
Yeah.
like, wow, that was a big investment for like okay return.
Hmm.
Um, so that is interesting. Like I wonder I actually suspect ADHDers without the sidekick of autism, like they I think they're actually kind of known for like having a lot of hobbies and jumping through them and like finding a lot of zest in life. Um, Yeah.
I do think a lot of our conversation so often centers on this internal push-pull, tug-of-war
Yeah.
situation that autistic versus ADHD parts have on a moment-by-moment basis. That's where I think the struggle with finding the hobby that satisfies the ADHD side versus finding the sensory supports for the autistic side and trying to figure out the balance and not
Mhm.
quite getting it right.
Yep. Yep. hmm I've been I've been asking the universe like to gift me a new special interest for a long time. So autism and then neurodivergence in general became a special interest, I don't know, like 3 years ago. And I shouldn't say this, but like well, I should say whatever. I'm kind of getting tired of it.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, okay, I'm ready for a new special interest, but the universe is not gifting that to me. And I think that's part of it. A lot of my hobbies have always like kind of fluttered around whatever my special interest is. So for a long time it was like philosophy and kind of non-Western theologies. And then within that, I had a lot of hobbies that kept me really engaged and interested. But right now, like I'm still interested in neurodivergence, but it doesn't have the same kind of passion it had early on. And so like that new special interest energy, I think that is partly what I'm craving right now. And no one's giving it to me. And you can't force these things.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me, though. I mean, your special interest took off, you've become a figurehead in said special interest. It's also become your career. I imagine it gets more complicated to kind of sort through it sometimes when it feels like this is more career centered than special interest centered in a lot of areas.
Yeah, that's a good point. I used to talk about how helpful it is when you can make a career out of your special interests, but there is probably this shadow side to that of it it's not as protective of the interest when you turn it into a career.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say that of like, I feel too protective of my interest to turn it into a career, which is yeah, there's wisdom in that.
Listen, every time my wife creates a new creation in her art studio and it sells and it takes off, and I'm like, okay, let's monetize this. Like, let's make this a legitimate business because she could do it. Like, she's so creative and talented. And she's like, why? Then it wouldn't be fun. And I just have never been able to
My
understand
brain
that.
doesn't get that either. Like, and that's that weird, like everything has to be productive in a capitalistic way. Like
Yep.
that I don't love that about me, but it's so strong.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like the clay earring business she had going for a while was like a hobby. People loved it. And I know if she was able to really dedicate time to it, it could have really become a huge thing. But for her, she's like, but then it wouldn't be fun. I'm just creating these things and people just happen to be buying them. Like, that's the fun part for me. And I'm like, well, wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, therein
Yeah.
lies the issue for me as well.
Okay, so we should mark this as a future conversations like our relationship to fun. And I do think this is more of an autism thing we're starting to describe. We started the conversation with ADHD, but um
Write it down.
yeah, relationship to fun. And I'd love to get people's insight before recording that cuz I'd be curious other people's experience around that.
Cool.
Yeah, and I do think that is part of my romantified future. You know, they're organized, they're present, but they're also like they're able to have fun. And I think that is part of being present. Like you can't really have fun if you aren't present.
No, yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. And there's some envy there sometimes, envy slash resentment, jealousy. I don't know what emotion it is.
Yeah,
Um,
and envy. I feel that
yeah,
when I
and
see
it's
people enjoying their lives. There's envy.
yeah, what's that all about? Like,
Uh,
weren't we going to record for a half an hour on this topic? Where are we? We're at like 45 minutes.
we're at 40. Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hmm.
Do you feel tempted to like leave our listeners with some like faux uplifting remarks? Is there like pressure?
Don't call me out on that. Yeah, I mean, of course. I think,
No, I
but
feel it too. Yeah.
yeah. No, I think this, like you said, sometimes these are the conversations that people really enjoy listening to, despite it not being
I
uplifting.
don't know if enjoy is the right
How about resonate with and relate to more often than not? So
I think that's probably more accurate.
I'm not going to try to add any faux like tips and strategies on how you can shift all of this romanticism, lack of fulfillment in life. So I'm good with what we just put out into the world.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not either going to fall into the temptation to kind of tie all of this messy rawness into like a tight bow. I don't
Good.
think I used the metaphor right. Tie a
No.
bow on it. What am I trying to say here, Patrick?
Yeah, tie a bow on it. We're not going to tie a nice little bow on this because I think this is just talking about the realities that a lot of us experience. So if this does resonate, leave us a
Sorry.
comment. Sorry as well. Yes, that too. If you know how to have fun, or
Tell us how.
have hobbies that you really enjoy, especially I want to know if you're autistic or autistic ADHD. Are there things that you really enjoy doing? Are there things that are really, really fun, that are sustainable for you? Because I'd like to hear these ideas without going to the Chat GPT route as well. I feel so strange right now.
I mean, this is this. I feel like this is a. I think it feels strange to the lack of resolution feels strange, and I think it feels strange to end a conversation in it. But I also think it feels honest. But I do think that's why, as a society in general, we feel a pull to like we've opened something that's hard and painful to look at. Let's neatly tie it up. But we've had some nice laughter here at the end, and laughter is a nice way not to tie it up, but to like, I think about it like scuba diving, or is that right? Like coming back to the surface. Like it's helpful to have some laughs to come back to the surface, but we don't need to put pretend resolution around it.
Agreed. I'll let you. That was a good way to close that out. So, hope this episode was helpful. Not necessarily uplifting, asterisk, but in reality, a nice reality check for both of us as well, and something that we'll probably continue to talk more about. So thanks for listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. New episodes are out on Fridays on all major podcast platforms and YouTube. Like, download, subscribe, and share.